So I'm going to begin this morning with a koan that is one of my favorite. I've probably talked about this one before. And it is number 4 in the Book of Serenity for those who are keeping track. As the Buddha, the world-honored one, was walking with the congregation, he pointed to the ground with his finger and said, "This is a good spot to build a sanctuary." Indra, emperor of the gods, took a blade of grass, stuck it in the ground, and said, "The sanctuary is built." The world-honored one smiled. So, it's finally fully springtime here in Maine. The leaves are even out. It was 92 degrees yesterday here in Unity. And it's going to be 60 something today. So proving once again the old New England aphorism, if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute. But it stays a lot more pleasant. Yeah, but it's spring. And that spring brings forth the wonder, brings forth the beauty, right? It's impossible, I think, not to be moved by springtime, right? The miraculous unfolding of all these beings that have been dormant during the winter, the birds returning, the birth of baby animals and baby birds. And, we've seen a couple of those recently. And yet, all of that, last week I talked a little bit about dialectics. All of that exists in a dialectical relationship. Yesterday, Elizabeth and I were traveling. We decided it was so hot here. We thought we'd go down to Belfast to the coast where we might be able to sit outside for a little while. And we were going along, and there was an owl in the middle of the road. And it flew up to a branch, and we stopped the car, and it sat there looking at us, and we looked at it, and we spent, a couple of minutes doing that. For us, that was a wonderful thing, right? That was a wonderful sight. Don't often get to see an owl in the daytime. But for the mice, it's not such a wonderful sight. Right? These two dimensions of reality exist constantly. And sometimes we're the owl and sometimes we're the mouse. Does that make it any less wondrous? Does it make it any less incredible as springtime unfolds? I don't know the answer to that question, but why did the Buddha stop in that particular spot and ask Indra to create the sanctuary in that particular spot? And my belief, my understanding is that it could have been anywhere. I don't think there was anything special about that spot. Any spot can be the sanctuary. Any spot, any moment, any piece of this earth is sacred, is special, is wondrous, is beautiful, and can also contain horror and pain and fear and anger. All of these things exist simultaneously. You know, we had that horrible shooting in Buffalo to add to all the other horrible things that are transpiring continuously. So that's the latest. You know, and so what I talked about last week, it's up for me again, it's present for me again, is how we are constantly living in this pendulum, in this swinging from moment to moment, from miraculous and beautiful to awful and terrible. Neither one describes reality. New reality is not one of those or the other. It is all. And when we say that we're going to wake to reality, we are saying that we are going to wake to it all. We don't get to choose. You know, in the evening Gotha, it says, I vow to awaken to only those things that I'm interested in and I like. No, it doesn't say that. Right? We wake to it all. And we live fully. We need to live fully and somehow embrace it all, somehow encompass it all, somehow deal with it all. With the sublime and with the terrible. And I think that's the capacity that the Dharma gives us, to at least take on that task of living with it all. John Kabat-Zinn's phrase, the full catastrophe, his book, The Full Catastrophe Living. The days and moments of beauty, the days and moments of pain. That's what it means to have a human life. We may not like that. We may rail against it at times or rebel against it at times, but that's what it means to have a human life. And the paradox is that when we can do that, when we can embrace it all, that's where the richness and the texture of our lives emerges. That's when we are living fully. That's when we are fully human. You know, I wish we were in a better world today, but we're not. And I don't know if it's a better world or a worse world than it's ever been. I don't know that. But certainly many, 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 many unpleasant and terrible aspects in our world today, many existential threats. And yet many wondrous things. Springtime comes every year. Summer, autumn, all of the seasons. Life arises everywhere. Everywhere is a sanctuary. Everywhere things are growing. Every blade of grass is miraculous. And our human minds almost cannot contain this paradox. Can at times be overwhelming. We can't grasp it intellectually. And the fact is that we don't need to grasp it intellectually. We don't need to make sense out of it. We don't need to understand it. We need to simply let go of our resistances, our preferences, our likes and our dislikes, our hatreds and our loves, and embrace the whole thing. And parts are going to feel better than others. But that's entirely a subjective judgment. When we grieve, it's our tears that heal us. It is our connection to the sadness and the pain that brings about the transformation back to peace and joy. When people are incapable of grieving, when people are incapable of shedding the tears, and many people are, they are equally incapable of healing. And perhaps some of you have had the experience of when you shed those tears that arise out of your love and caring and depth of relationship with another being. There's also something warm and special about those tears. They're not just cold, detached, but we've got to be willing to enter that space of the sadness, of the grief. We've got to be willing to cry the tears. And now we're grieving on so many levels, right? We're grieving for the earth and for the now probably millions of species that have been eradicated and that are being eradicated. We're grieving for this country, for the future of our democracy, for all the lives that are being lost and are going to be lost. We're grieving for Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. We're grieving for the people of Russia. And that grief is appropriate and necessary. Because that's the response to this moment. That's the response to what's happening in this moment. We need to allow ourselves to grieve. We need to allow ourselves to feel the sadness, to feel the pain, to shed a tear or many tears. The tendency in this culture is to just sweep it all aside. Live our lives as if none of these things are happening. And somehow, if we acknowledge them, if we let them in, our lives will be diminished. But just the opposite is true. Because these dichotomies are real. We cannot live one side of the dichotomy and not have the other. You can't have just hope and joy and happiness and not have pain and sadness and grief. And if we don't allow ourselves to feel pain and sadness and grief, then we can't really feel happiness and joy. They exist in tandem. They are both sides of the same coin. If we can't grieve for a loved one, then we can't truly experience our love for that person, our caring for them, what their life meant to us. We've got to be willing to acknowledge both sides, to live with both sides. We probably can't solve any of these major problems in this moment. And who knows what the outcomes will be, but we can live. We can live and be fully human. And we can use this gift of the human life that we have been given. As far as I know, we're not getting another one. So it's a terrible thing. You know, for those of us who are older, we know it passes so quickly. That we don't want to waste it. We want to live it. And most importantly, we want to realize our bodhisattva vows. We want to help other beings that are suffering. Which of course we can't do unless we're willing to acknowledge and see the suffering. Maybe we just help in a tiny way. Maybe our lives are only going to matter this much, but they matter. What we do matters. You know, this is one body. All things are connected. That is not a theoretical construct. That is a direct experience. That is what it means to realize our true nature. To deeply realize that all the divisions that we see are an illusion. And that everything in this universe is deeply and intimately connected. And therefore, just like what happens to my big toe happens to the rest of us, the rest of me, what happens to any of us happens to all of us and to the entire cosmos. So how we live our lives truly matters. Zen is not nihilistic, quite to the contrary. Zen is very affirming of life and of living and of jumping in with both feet and giving our all. And bringing compassion, bringing healing, bringing whatever help we can bring to any situation. And by doing that, we are planting the blade of grass. We are creating the sanctuary wherever we are. We are manifesting sacredness in our ordinary lives. And that is the best that we can do under any circumstances, regardless of what's happening in the world. That's the best we can do. And it's the worst things are, the more it's needed, right? I mean, if everything was wonderful and peaceful, our contributions to compassion and peace and healing wouldn't be so significant. But right now, those are not the dominant forces in the world. And therefore, what we contribute is more important than ever. And the tears that we shed are more important than ever. You know, when I walk out in the woods these days, I can't walk out there and not at some point feel how fragile it all is, how endangered it is, how uncertain its future is. And that makes it all the more special. It makes that connection all the more important. It makes speaking on behalf of nature all the more important. It means acknowledging that everywhere is a sanctuary. Everywhere is sacred. Everywhere is a place to bring the Dharma, to live the Dharma, to practice the Dharma. Not knowing the outcome, but living fully right now. Living fully each day. Throwing ourselves into this act of creating the sanctuary. Thank you.
Um, Peter, I was struck by what you said about us being awake to all of life, not just what we like. And it reminded me of um, a situation that's been on my mind the past few days. Uh, a few days ago, I read in the New York Times about this Maine state senator, Chloe Maxim, and she wrote a book called Dirt Road Revival. And it was reading about it in the Times, where she has said that she was elected to her office because she goes into sections of rural Maine where people are not usually of her political persuasion. And I thought, oh, I have a young friend who's graduating from law school, and I thought, well, this is a perfect gift for me to give her because she has political intentions. And then I read in the Portland Press Herald yesterday or day before. It was a front page story, and it mentioned, among other things, that there were many Democrats who were disappointed in her, uh, who she had appeared on Fox News, and when I saw that she'd appeared on Fox News, I thought, oh, well, I'm not going to buy that book. I'm not going to give it to my young friend. And last night I was with my son and his family, and we kind of had a discussion about it, and I think it made me realize that yes, that's where she should have gone with this. And I do need to get the book and give it to my young friend and read it to myself, because otherwise it's just much too easy to close oneself off to just what feels good to us, just what we like, and not weighing a different point of view. So a little current events that plays out, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You know, when we create separation, when we create that illusion for ourselves, then we're putting up walls, right? There are the people who like me and the people who are not like me. There are the people I like, and there are the people I don't like, you know, and so on and so forth. Um, and the same with natural things. And that is, of course, an illusion, and it's a particularly pernicious illusion. You know, in Buddhism, we talk about three poisons. And these poisons are very apparent in the world today. Three poisons. The first one is greed. Obvious what we're talking about there. The second is hatred. Well, that's obvious. The third is ignorance. Now, most people don't understand what we mean by ignorance. That is not that we haven't all graduated the 12th grade, or, you know, it is that we're not aware of our interconnection, our interrelationship. It is the lack of awareness of the one body. It is the belief in the separation that is so destructive that it made itself, you know, onto the list of the three poisons. And unfortunately, you know, that's it. All those poisons, you know, they have ascended in a terrible way in this time, you know. And the ignorance no less than the other. You know, we are as a culture so oblivious to the well-being of others and to the understanding that the well-being of others is our well-being. You know, both on the left and on the right. That's not a disease that's belongs to any one part of the political spectrum or the other. It's a disease of our culture that says, you know, I'm number one, and what's best for me is what's best, and you don't matter. And by the way, I don't like you, and I don't like what you stand for, and I don't like what you believe in. That is ignorance at work. So when I talk about we are needing to embrace this entire reality, that it means just that. And we need to embrace Fox News. Not easy, I admit. But that sense, I mean, we need to not just automatically reject half of humanity for any criteria, because they don't, look at the racism and the anti-Semitism and all of these things, rejecting entire sections of humanity because they don't look like us, or they don't worship like us, or they don't, and that's that disease of ignorance. And not understanding that the fate of one is also the fate of all. What when we cannot visit upon others things that will not be visited upon us, because this is one body. We cannot hurt other people without hurting ourselves. We cannot hurt other beings without hurting ourselves. It's all connected. And we ignore that at our peril, and we are ignoring it.
I watched the Fantastic Fungi yesterday, which is quite extraordinary. And it seems to be a very fine example of cooperation without um, the constructs that we confuse our lives with. I mean, they do their thing and it goes everywhere and it connects everything.
If people haven't seen that, it's a wonderful movie. Paul Stamets created that. He's one of the primary researchers on mycelia, and it is that that we know now that the fungi connect the entire ecosystem, and that they will even transport nutrients from one part to the other, from a place where they are in abundance to a place where they're lacking. There's this wonderful intelligence, in the natural world to do things like that. And the fungi are way ahead of us. The fungi are way ahead of us because we're, but it's that arises out of that illusion of separation. The fungi doesn't have an illusion of separation. The trees don't have an illusion of separation. Excuse me. So the possibility arising, we need to be like the mycelia, right? We need to bring the nutrients where they're lacking. What are the nutrients that humanity needs? Compassion. I mean, sometimes people literally need food. They need things like that, clothing, shelter. But most importantly, all beings need compassion. They need us to embrace them, not to reject them, not to judge them. It's remarkable to me. It's remarkable because, if we look at the core message of all religions, this is the core message of all religions. And then we as human beings distort that so badly. And we only have compassion for some people, and we only have compassion for the people that think the way that we do. We only have the compassion for people who worship the way that we do. That's our human tendency. There's another dialectic, if you will, between compassion and sort of tribalism, between our need to embrace all against our tendency to want to carve ourselves off as a special group, as a separate group. It's something that we need to work with constantly. And then again, it's a dialectic, right? If what I want to do is acknowledge my ancestors, and I want to acknowledge the traditions of the past, and I want to acknowledge my fellows in this world, that can be positive. It doesn't have to be negative, but where it becomes negative is when I'm suddenly elevating some above others, when I'm rejecting some, when some are good and some are bad, right? Which is like the next step. That I'm only going to help those who are in my tribe, not to other tribes.
I heard an interview with Cory Booker, and his words have stayed with me. He said, if you only surround yourself with those who agree with you, and if you only read those things that you agree with, then you are part of the problem. And I think it's so easy for us to see ourselves as having the right views and not see ourselves as being part of the problem.
Buddha would say having views is the problem. Not right views, wrong views, any kind of views, right? But back to the Buddha's peacemaker, not knowing. That's why that's so important. That space of not knowing, of not being certain, of, because it's once I start knowing that I'm smarter, I'm better, I'm right, you're wrong, and so on and so forth. But if I can stay in that space of not knowing, then I am open to all possibilities, to all truths, to all beings, right? Not knowing is the central core of allowing compassion to come through us.
Peter, I think you answered my question that I was about to ask for these last two comments, but I'm still curious if you have anything else to add. I guess my question is around your advice on practices to help break through that ignorance of separation.
John Scott, I didn't hear the last part of what you said. I don't know if you got cut off or.
I was asking, originally I had curiosity around your suggestions on how to approach breaking through that ignorance of separation. And I guess I'm now kind of curious. It sounds like through compassion and awareness is what I'm thinking, but specifically, are there practices or meditations that help break through that ignorance and see?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, essentially, in one sense, everything that we're doing is with that in mind, right? Everything that we're doing, you know, when we talk about realizing our true nature, that's what that's all about. But there are levels to this, right? So we can't, in a sense, we aren't going to, well, we can say it, but we're not going to. That, you know, we're just going to sit around 15, 20 years until we have a great realization, and then we're not going to have ignorance, right? So there are approximations along the way. There are, you know, ultimately that realization has no intellectual component to it whatsoever, no cognitive component to it whatsoever. It is the antithesis of that. But that said, first, along the way, we need to kind of cultivate it and bring it into our lives, even though we may not have a deep experience of realization, right? We can make an intellectual approximation. And I think we need to do, you know, I think that we can do that and need to do that. And we need to remind ourselves, you know, earlier this morning, I was talking with somebody about, you know, Zwigon calls himself master, that koan. And in that Zwigon, you know, he's reminding himself, he says to himself, you know, what does he say? Oh, does he say awake? Is that the phrase he uses? You know, thoroughly awake. He says, thoroughly awake, thoroughly awake. And he goes, yes, yes. You know, we need to remind ourselves to be thoroughly awake in each moment. When we're forgetting it, when we're creating the other, we create the other constantly, you know. And so to the point that Susan made earlier, you know, we create, whether we're on the left or on the right in this country right now, we are creating the other constantly. And we're, you know, we're vilifying them. And I mean, that's probably the most serious illness that we have in this country right now, right? This idea, like, you know, we're going to go kill all the libs. No, we're going to go kill all the, you know, the rich people, or we're going to, you know, everybody's got, you know, these crazy, crazy things. And no, wait a minute, we're all human. So we need to remind ourselves, because I think it's so easy to fall into it. Let's, you know, and I put a lot of the responsibility for this on the media. The media is using this and creating this to make money, right? And politicians are using this and creating this to make money on both sides, you know, on both sides. They fear monger, they create, you know, they emphasize the separation. And so I think we have to, if, you know, just at a cognitive level, constantly be reminding ourselves, because it's completely natural to fall into that trap. It's so omnipresent in this culture, and in so many ways, you know. And it doesn't matter on what side of the divides we're on, everybody, it's happening on both sides of every divide, rich and poor, Democrats and Republicans, you know, on and on and on. you know, it's so easy to fall into that and forgetting. Beyond that, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, that's really what Zazen is about, letting go, you know. When we're sitting, it comes up, you know, and we let it go. You know, now there are particular things, you know, practice wise, you know, something like metta, which is intended to cultivate loving kindness, is a wonderful practice. It's not a Zen practice, it's a Theravadan practice, but it's an important and wonderful practice. The Tibetans have the practice of Tonglen, again, not Zen, Tibetan, but also a wonderful way of addressing the darkness in the world and within us, you know. So these all of these practices can be rich and valuable, but fundamentally Zazen, we have to learn to let go, not get stuck, you know, not live in one place or the other, not be right. One of our greatest sins is being right, is knowing with certainty. Because then we exclude all the other possibilities. I mean, again, you know, that's the trap that religions fall into, right? They are right and everybody else is wrong. They know the truth and everybody else doesn't know. And that's obviously utter nonsense. No single group has the hold on the truth. No single group has the hold on the right way to live in this world. And unfortunately, you know, that kind of rigid absolutist theology is one of the forces that's contributing to this, some of these terrible trends in the world. And no, you know, no one religion has a monopoly on that. They all get stuck in that place of we know, we're right, you're wrong, you don't know. I don't know if I answered your question, but you know, yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
So kind of closing, I mean, this is in a sense the hopeful thing. We all can be part of the solution, right? We all can be part of the solution. We all can work to free ourselves from ignorance, as well as from greed and hatred. They, you know, they go together. They feed one another. Right? To have hatred, we must have the other. Right? We hate those people. We hate what they do. We hate what they stand for, so on, because they're other than us. The greed, you know, mine, my life, my house, my land, my, you know, and therefore other. If this is mine, then it's not yours. You know, in a sense, that illusion of other is the source of the other two poisons. You know, when we deeply realize and we see that the entire world is our body, what are we lacking? What do we need to accumulate? Right? Greed just gets blown right out of the water. Because we have everything. We are everything. We're lacking absolutely nothing. We are complete and perfect. And so there's no hunger. This is our project. Good news, you get to do this for a while and then you die. Okay.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.